Welcome back. In the last lecture, we looked at kind of an overview of the Latin language, where it came from, how it influences today in English, and just a little bit of the background on pronunciation and things like that. So let's get into chapter 1 and start looking at how to deal with verbs in Latin. So starting with verbs, just to review, verbs describe the subject's activity or state of being. So I always think of verbs as being the action part of the sentence. Verbs have 5 characteristics, and we'll talk about this all throughout Latin grammar. The 5 characteristics are person, number, tense, mood, and voice. So let's go ahead and look at the 5 characteristics. The first characteristic is person. This tells us who performs the action of the verb. And just like in English, in Latin we have first person, which we translate as I or we. Second person, you. Third person, he, she, it, or they. So person, who performs the action. Next up is number. How many subjects are there? Is the verb singular or plural? Then we have tense. Tense tells us the time of the action, so when the action actually happened. In Latin, there are 6 tenses: present, imperfect, future, perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect. In chapter 1, we'll start looking at the present tense. The next characteristic we'll look at is mood. Mood is the manner or state of being of the verb, and there are 3 moods in Latin. There's indicative, which indicates a fact, and most words are usually indicative mood. Then we have the imperative. Imperatives give a direct command. And then subjunctive, which are hypothetical or potential actions. So the difference: indicative indicates facts, subjunctive indicates things that either haven't happened yet or may not happen. And then imperative is the command. Voice indicates whether the subject performs the action of the verb or receives the action, so active or passive. So here in chapter 1, we're going to start to look at conjugating verbs. Conjugation is just listing together all of the forms of the verb according to the 5 characteristics. So we'll conjugate the English verb to praise in the present active indicative, and we'll list all of its forms, singular and plural, first, second, and third person. So first person singular, I praise. First person plural, we praise. Second singular, you praise. Second plural, you all praise. And then third singular, he, she, or it praises. And then the plural, third person, they praise. We do a similar thing in Latin. In Latin, though, we indicate the subject not by a pronoun like we do in English, but through a personal ending. So we're going to attach an ending to the end of the verbal stem, which we'll see here in just a second. So here are the personal endings for Latin. First person singular. It's either an O or an M, and this indicates I. Second singular, S, which indicates you singular. The third person personal ending is T, which indicates either he, she, or it. Then we go into the plural. First person plural ending, M-U-S, moose, which indicates we. Second person plural, T-I-S, you plural. And then third person plural, N-T, which is they. So there are the personal endings for the verbal that we're going to add to the verbal stem. Either O or M, S, T, and in the plural, either M-U-S, T-I-S, or N-T, depending on which person we want to indicate. So let's start conjugating a verb in Latin. In your book, the model verbs for first and second conjugations are laudo, laudare, which means to praise, and moneo, monere, which means to advise. Verbs that end in are in the infinitive are considered first conjugation verbs. If the infinitive ends in ere, they're considered second conjugation verbs. And the infinitive is just the second principal part. So laudare and monere are both the infinitives. So we'll start conjugating our first conjugation verb, laudo, laudare, laudavi, laudatum, in the present active indicative. So for now, just ignore those last 2 principal parts. We don't need laudavi or laudatum yet. So as you memorize your vocabulary, go ahead and memorize them, but just realize we're not going to use those until we get to the perfect tense. So the first principal part, in this case laudo, is always first person singular present active indicative. So we don't have to do anything to get that form. The second part is the infinitive itself. So laudare is the infinitive form of the verb, which we would simply translate as to praise. So it doesn't have any time associated with it. So we'll use those first two parts to form the present active indicative. So with laudel, laudare, we can form everything we need for the present active indicative. So first of all, we need to find the present stem. To find the present stem, we drop the re from the infinitive. So for our verb laudo, laudare, we take the infinitive laudare and drop the re, and we get lauda as the verbal stem. So let's go ahead and start to build a paradigm for that verb. So we have our verbal stem lauda, and with the exception of the first person singular, which we already know through the first principal part, all we do is just add the personal endings to the stem. So we get for first person singular laudo, which was already given, I praise. Second person singular, we would end up with laudas, you praise. Third singular, laudat, he, she, or it praises. Then we go to the plural, take our verbal stem, add the endings. Laudamus, we praise. Second plural, laudatis, you plural praise, or y'all praise. And then third person plural, laudant, they praise. So we'll do the same thing with a second conjugation verb. So we have our second conjugation model verb, moneo, monere. And we have the verbal stem monet, which we got from dropping the re from the infinitive. So first person singular, again, already given, moneo, I advise. Second person singular, mones, you advise. Third singular, monet, he, she, or it advises. Then in the plural, monamus, we advise. Second person plural, monetis, all of you advise, or y'all advise. And then third plural, monent, they advise. So again, just add the endings to the stem, with the exception of first person singular, which are given. So those previous forms were for the indicative mood. The imperative mood is used to give a direct command. It only has two forms, singular and plural. So they're very easy to form. We just simply take the verbal stem for the singular, and we add a te to make it plural. So keep in mind, commands are always second person by nature. So for our model verbs, we have lauda, praise, in the singular, and laudate, all of you praise. For the other model verb, the second conjugation verb, we have monet, advise. And in the plural, monete, all of you advise. So again, the imperative mood is actually very simple. A few words on translation. Since we only know how to deal with the verbs so far, we'll just concentrate on those as we do our Chapter 1 translations. So always start by translating the verb. Look at the verb, look at the ending to determine the person and number, and then go back and translate the verbal stem itself and add the pronoun that we would use in English. Also keep in mind that in Latin there's no set word order. Subjects can be anywhere in the sentence. Same thing with the verbs. They can be at the beginning, they can be in the middle, they can be at the end. Your book mentions there's sort of a standard word order where the verbs come at the end and the subjects come at the beginning, but that's not always true. What you'll need to do as you translate is put the words into a standard English word order, or they may not make very much sense. So as you translate, always put the subject of the sentence first, and then the verb, and then the object. And then we can fill in the gaps after that. Also, be sure to begin memorizing your vocabulary. As we do the verbs, memorize all four principal parts of the verb for now. Remember, we only need the first two parts at this point, but go ahead and memorize them so you don't have to go back and relearn things as we get farther into the course. And when you do the translations, do the best you can. We don't know very much about nouns or adjectives yet and how they work in Latin. So once we get through all that stuff in Chapter 2, the translations will get easier. So that brings us to the end of our short introduction to Chapter 1. In the next section, I will go through and read the vocabulary to you to give you an idea of how they sound and read the sentences to you. So again, just do the best you can on these. Since it is not a spoken language anymore, we're not going to be terribly picky about pronunciation. but we'll do the best you can. So again, we'll see you soon, and Walete.